Hello and thanks for stopping by. This is Maniac Mansion for the NES, and I'm playing from a cartridge on a retro USB AVS. This was a Lucasarts game, and this port was released by Jaleco in 1990. I'm a fan of this game, and I only have one basic criticism. Some of the colors in the game are almost offensive. The vibrancy of certain colors, mostly pinks and purples, they just seem off to me. Everything is oddly fluorescent. I've played this game on a bunch of different systems, and this is the one system where the colors seem strange. Maybe I'll check the system settings in the AVS. Anyway, this is one of the few NES point-and-click games. For anyone not familiar with what that means, basically when you move the thumbpad, you don't move your character on screen. Instead, you're moving a reticle. Using the reticle in conjunction with the list of commands you click at the bottom of the screen, you can move your characters, you can perform actions, you can manipulate the environment that way. Point-and-click adventures were huge in the 80s and 90s. Most of them tended to be PC games. Lucasarts, they released a ton of these similar games on various platforms. There were a few on the Commodore 64, and pretty much everything was released on PC back then. I think Lucasarts had close to 20 games like this, and a bunch of other companies had games in this rough style as well. So we're not talking an action game. We're really just talking about running a paced adventure story. There will be various timing elements to the game, of course, but really, these types of games are driven by this story, and it's up to you to figure out what you need to click and interact with, and what do I have to combine, how do I progress the story forward in an environment that doesn't always make it obvious. I played this game on the Commodore 64 when I was young, so I do remember lots of the story. Now that I'm playing it on the NES, though, it is a little different, but fundamentally, I'd have to say it's the same. Maniac Mansion, at its core, is a quirky game. There's a gothic mansion with weird things going on inside. The story takes you on a strange trip that involves alien tentacles, a mad scientist and his family, and of course you trying to figure out how to save the day. Basically, it all starts with Dave's girlfriend Sandy being kidnapped by Dr. Fred. Dr. Fred is some crazy scientist that has somehow gotten himself wrapped up with aliens. You control 3 characters in this game. You start with Dave, and you get to select 2 other characters to play as well. You can switch between characters at will, and you'll use this particular mechanic throughout the entire game. From time to time you can use it to affect events. You can pull a lever in one place that might open a door in another place that someone else might be stuck behind. Things like that. Also, when you switch back and forth between characters, the music will change. Different characters are followed by different music. I really like that. And the music, even though it's on the NES, it's actually pretty good. Seriously, it's kind of fun to listen to some of this while you're playing. Also, I double-checked the Commodore 64 and PC versions online. Neither had any music at all, so great. Way to go, Jaleco. Now I guess they get a pass on the colors. There are a handful of different endings possible for this game, and you advance the game in different ways depending on who you've actually selected for your team. I think there are 5 different potential endings to uncover here. This overall, it's a large puzzle game, and you have to figure out exactly how you need to manipulate the pieces of the environment to get yourself to the end. You can make mistakes in the game, and they can affect what you actually can and can't do. If you have an object, it's possible to waste it, or at least some of the obstacles can be wasted. It's set up so you can't just take every item and use every item on everything in the game until something works. The one thing that reminded me of this was the paint thinner. The paint thinner is an object with a very specific purpose. It thins paint, as you would imagine. You can attempt to use this on a lot of items, and I did this, and the game replied, "That was a waste." And yes, it certainly was. It disappeared from my inventory and I couldn't use it again. 20 minutes later, I found the obvious place in the game that I needed to use the paint thinner, but since I'd used it already, I couldn't interact with that location. That doesn't necessarily mean the game is over, but doing something like that could possibly remove a potential ending from the game. I mentioned this game was quirky, and it is. I mean quirky like it's the result of the story. The characters are kind of cartoony, sometimes they break the fourth wall, and they crack jokes or talk to you directly. In this game, not all characters are created equal. There will be different things certain characters can and cannot do. For instance, you run into a tentacle alien on the upper floors of the house, and if you're playing as Bernard, he panics and runs out of the room every time. So, if the tentacle is there, Bernard cannot proceed. Other characters can interact with the tentacle, so you'll have to leverage different people at different stages of the game to try to advance the game overall. It's important to note you don't have weapons in this game. There is no fighting. It's just oddball puzzle solving. If you can appreciate this kind of humor, you'll probably appreciate this game. There's a lot to learn and remember in a game like this, and there are certainly a variety of walkthroughs available online. Honestly, to really enjoy this, I would stay away from those until you beat the game at least once, then use those to try to figure out all the things you missed. The whole purpose of a game like this is to figure it out, or at least I think so anyway. Back when this first came out, I played it on the Commodore 64 with my brothers, and we spent hours and hours trying to understand exactly what we were supposed to do. There was no internet back then, so we had nothing but time in our hands and trial and error. There were also no cheat manuals, so it was always sink or swim. The Commodore version apparently is slightly different than the NES, but not much. I guess some edits were required before Nintendo would authorize the game for production. Anyway, I've beaten the game a few different ways, and although I haven't beaten the NES version yet, I've been able to get pretty far based on what I remember. The biggest thing I never forgot with this game: the chainsaw. You can't get the chainsaw in the kitchen, it's just there to taunt you. Overall, I consider Maniac Mansion to be a clever point-and-click game. It's one of those games where you're going to want to try to interact with everything in one way or another. The story's clever, and it's nice to be able to beat the game in multiple ways. If you've played point-and-click adventure games before, I'm willing to bet you'll appreciate this one. This game was also made into a television show in the 90s. I believe it was written by Eugene Levy. I think it was broadcast in Canada mostly, but there may be some places online to view it. I'm pretty sure it's a family-safe type of a show, and it's only loosely connected to this game. There's also a really good sequel that came out for this called Day of the Tentacle. I think I have a copy of that on PC somewhere. Well, that's all I have for Maniac Mansion. Thanks for giving this one a watch, and I'll catch you next time.